Alrighty, we are here live from Indianapolis currently before Nebraska gets ready for the Indiana Hoosiers on Saturday morning. Nick Ceyair, Jay Foreman coming at you from Indianapolis. Just got here into town probably about an hour ago. Got settled into our hotel rooms and going to be bringing you plenty of coverage from Indianapolis/Bloomington these next 48 hours. Plenty of stuff coming. If you are making the trip, make sure you join us on Friday night from the Tap down in Bloomington. We'll be there from 6 to 8 p.m. Central Time, 7 to 9 p.m. Out here in Indiana. I want to thank our sponsors first and foremost for allowing this trip to be possible. League One Volleyball, Heartland of Nebraska Windows, and Sandhills Global. Jay, I'll turn it over to you, man. The buzz, you're starting to feel it after a Nebraska bye week, Indiana bye week as well. But you have a 6-0 team, top 20, a 5-1 program in Nebraska. It's going to be a good game Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, right when we landed, it's a big difference from Big Ten Media Days. There's full stands with Indiana swag for people to buy, and then you saw a lot more. We saw a lot more people with Indiana stuff walking through the airport. So we know Curt Cignetti and the Hoosiers have done a good job, and they got the fan base all riled up. And look, they got a promotion on their day off. Usually, people, as we've seen through the NFL and college, people get fired on their day off. They went from number 18 to 16 through a bye week. And I think as people start to break down Indiana, then obviously look at the matchup with Nebraska. There's a reason why big noon kickoff is here, and then it's also another reason why, like you said, with our sponsors, appreciate that we were able to take the Jay and Nick show, Nick and Jay show, special edition of pre-game, again, day of the game, and then obviously post-game as well, just because of the excitement and the potential for Nebraska to, reach their be bowl eligible for the first time in a long time.
I guess that's a good spot to start, because I don't want to go through all of the things that we have kind of in our minds of what we want to talk about throughout the weekend here. But make sure you do follow us on 93.7 The Ticket. Follow us on our personal social media channels, because there's going to be plenty of content coming your way from Indiana this weekend. But the bowl game one is an interesting one to start, because you obviously have the Matt Rhule comment earlier this week of like, we're not focused on that. And I think obviously not, but as from a fan's perspective, Jay, I mean, this is a big opportunity for Nebraska. The back half of the schedule looks a little more daunting maybe than what we expected it before the season. And maybe that's the fault of our own, but you would now have an undefeated Indiana team that is certainly gettable, just like Ohio State is, just like the rest of the schools are. But this one is much more likely maybe in the back of your mind than maybe next weekend against Ohio State. So it'd be really nice to get that 6th win and your first bowl appearance since 2017 this weekend on Saturday.
Yeah, I think Matt Rhule's taking the right approach, and I think the team is as well. Like they are fully aware, as long as they play well, everything will handle itself. As far as on the scoreboard. So they knew, and I think they focused on in the bye week. Just listening to some of the tea leaves coming out of the couple of times that the players and Coach Rhule spoke or has spoken, is that they really went back and worked on themselves. Probably did some self scouting. Worked on things that they felt like they can continue to get better at. And they know obviously they're going to look at Indiana and obviously going to be well prepared in their game plan for Indiana. But I think most importantly, they know if they handle their business, they'll be just fine. And you can't really worry about the bowl game because there's a lot of football to be played. And, as far as the schedule changing and stuff like that, I mean, I guess you got to give, all the teams on the back half credit. The preseason stuff is all just guesstimation. Reality comes in the plan, and you got the best coaches and the best players, I feel, in the nation. So you always got to prepare for everybody's best shot, and that's what they're going to probably expect from Indiana here in the next day or two. But then also, I always say like this, man, let's not undersell ourselves. If I was a player or a coach and say, Indiana has to prepare for us as much as we have to prepare for them. As long as we do our thing, we'll be just fine.
I think with that and on that point, let's talk about it from like Indiana's standpoint, because they were the first team in college football to get a bowl game. I should say punch their ticket to a bowl game, right? Curt Cignetti, it's homecoming weekend this weekend. Curt Cignetti has not lost while being the head coach of the Indiana Hoosiers. It feels like there's a lot of pressure on them to continue showing up and showing out. But it also doesn't feel like Curt Cignetti really cares, or he kind of accepts it, and this is kind of how he wants to operate, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, look, he said, I mean, his whole thing, Google me, and he's been pretty successful everywhere he's been at, and he brought a lot of players, and so they have some continuity there, and so, you
Mhm.
know, the pressure there's a lot of pressure on them, whether he wants to admit it or not, and there's
Yeah.
pressure on him, and there's pressure in that building, in the staff as well. You got to think, Nick, when you come into a historically, let's just say, a non-football school in Indiana, right? That's not taking shots. That's just being honest, right? And you come in and you start off 6-0 after you had a pretty good and well-liked coach in Tom Allen, and you come right in from James Madison and you go 6-0.
Mhm.
Those coordinators and assistant coaches start to get looks, and so there's a lot of pressure to continue with this momentum. That's just in the football staff. That's just being 100% honest. And then obviously there's pressure because there's more interviews, there's more eyes on your program, there's more expectations now. And the funny thing is about it, I think this is the first sellout in, I think, well over 15 to 20 years, maybe even longer than that,
Mhm.
a true sellout, right? So then
Yeah.
now you're having people show up with, I guess, say, unrealistic expectations. You're getting a lot of fans that are starting to it's kind of like, it reminds me of a little bit, Nick. I think they're probably a little bit, I think there was more meat on the bone when Cignetti took over, but but it's comparable to when Colorado was 3-0 last year, and then now they're 6-0. And so there's a lot more pressure on them, but I think that bodes well for Nebraska. If Nebraska comes in and you can play the underdog role, feel like you're disrespected. You were ranked and stubbed your toe against Indiana, then or not Indiana, but Illinois, and then you come back and you beat Purdue, and then you beat a team like Rutgers, which we know firsthand from Big Ten Media Day. Rutgers was the belle of the ball. That was the
Yeah.
hot pick in the off. So it's still the same team. Everybody's excited about. Nebraska beat them at home, and so it sets up well for Nebraska, but it also Indiana's going to be a tough out, man. They're a well coached team, and seem like they're excited about football right now.
I find it interesting just because we've had the conversation this week a couple of times, and maybe this is not the greatest conversation to have, but it's the conversation of like, what does Curt Cignetti's future look like?
Yeah, I mean,
I mean, there's that part. Like I told you on the plane that he reminds me a lot of Bo Pelini. He does, just kind of in his just brash comments, and maybe that's not such a bad thing,
yeah,
right? Because like a program like Indiana, and you can clump like Purdue into this as well.
sure.
They need these coaches that can make comments, but then also like Jeff Brom did with Purdue, and now what Curt Cignetti to this point has done with Indiana, back them up, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the biggest part is if your words don't carry any weight, but then it doesn't matter. But Curt Cignetti to this point, his words, what he said, the Google me piece of it, the everybody sucks piece of it that he had at Assembly Hall, like to that point, it's unblemished, right? And
Right.
so now you start to see the attention from the national pundits and the national media. And now you get, I said it this morning on the drive, but like Indiana's used to Fox Big Noon Kickoff being at a place because of somebody else. They're used to
Right. Oh
being
yeah. Yeah.
at Ohio State, and Big Noon's there for Ohio State.
Right.
Now they're here because, yeah, of Nebraska, but also mostly because of Indiana.
Yeah, this is new territory for him, and it's a great point. When you said it to me on the plane, I was, I kind of objected pretty quickly, like, nah, no way, because somebody asked him about it. He said his wife loves it there and stuff like that, and that's what he's supposed to say. And I think he does fit in well with. I think it's a really good hire because
Yeah.
I think he fits in well with Indiana and coming from James Madison. I don't think he's technically or realistically a job hopper, but if something big comes up, he's definitely going to have to listen. And so, a lot depends on how they finish, right? And where they go from there. And maybe, how much Indiana is able to step up and reinvest into their coaching staff and assistants. I think that's going to be bigger issue than anything to up the two coordinator, pay pool, for Indiana. And then obviously keep on pushing some of their alumnus to invest in their NIL, so they can go out there and still recruit. Ultimately, I think with Indiana, it is new territory. We said it before, a couple minutes ago. Is like, generally, I guess they were like the homecoming game. Now they get Big Noon Kickoff on homecoming. There's a lot of things that go on with homecoming. The way that the game is played, the pageantry before the game. There's going to be a lot more people on the field, before the game. And so it's new territory. And yes, once the game kicks off, you got to play football. But there's a lot more distractions here, there in Bloomington that they've had in quite some time. You got to think that, with Jerry DiNardo, he was probably their best, most prominent coach. He had one really good year. And then the year that the COVID year when Indiana was really good, they didn't really get any of it, any of this because of COVID. And so this is really, really new territory for everybody there. And it's going to be interesting to see how they react. But then also, I'm really more interested to see how they really, really match, or I guess compete against a legit opponent. Where I think Nebraska matches up the best, especially defensively, better than anybody that's faced Indiana. And I think offensively we pose some physicality issues that they haven't faced as well. So it'd be interesting to see how they handle real competition, because everything that they've needed this year so far, Nick, has gone their way. Obviously you got the cupcakes, and then Maryland had them on the ropes. They decided to change their whole game plan. They were able to withstand with Northwestern coming back and pull out late. They scored the last 17 or pull away late, scored the last 17 points in a row after Northwestern, changed the way that they were playing. And then obviously the UCLA game, they scored 7 points in UCLA, 2 plays, 2 turnovers. Now you're up nothing. That's game, set, match on a team like UCLA that was just learning how to walk and chew gum. So not to take anything away from them, but also be, more realistic on, where they're at. And if Nebraska comes in and stays out of their own way, they're going to be in for a ball game, comes Saturday at 11 o'clock.
What does that look like? Like, what's the key there for Nebraska? Because a lot's going to be made about this Indiana offense, obviously, right? 47.5 points per game,
right,
through 6 games, and one, maybe a little blemished by that 77-point performance, or skewed, maybe that's a better word, skewed by that 77-point performance against Western Illinois. But I guess, like, what's the key for Nebraska defensively? As you just kind of give us preliminary thoughts on Curtis Rorick, that Indiana offense.
Right.
That to this point has had little to no issues scoring the football.
Right. I think the biggest thing, obviously, you want to win first and second down. So they either going to, conventional run game, and they got 4 capable running backs, and they all are different body types. They got a do-it-all back. They got a really smooth back. They got a kind of a third down back, and then they have a bruiser. So Nebraska, don't let Indiana dictate the pace and let them get off early with, some conventional runs and some yards after contact. So you want to make sure you shut that down early. And then it's going to come down to tackling, right? I think as long as we don't, bust any coverages and make some tackles and rally to the ball, and then, and then obviously that puts us in a good position on third down. How do you do well against a passing attack, like, short to intermediate passing attack, and then they set you up for going up top when they get closer to the, 30 or 40 yard line of their opponent? Mm-hmm. Is you got to do a good job of pass rush lanes. I think we're a bigger defensive line that they've seen, get some hands on some balls, but then also get O'Rourke off his spot. And then also where he's really, here's where he's really turned the tide late a little bit, is that late quarterback leak out, get some first downs, and make some plays off schedule. Well, what Nebraska has to do when he does that, you got to punish him. And he's a big, tall quarterback, 6'5", 225, a really good athlete, and a very established quarterback that came from the MAC, University of Ohio. But you got to punish him. And, to be honest with you, when you play against a tall quarterback like that, you got to chop him down, and then that would discourage him from running, later in the game.
Yeah, Curtis Rourke, 6'5", 223 on the year, 1,700 yards, 14 touchdowns, and done what we know is so important from being a quarterback, Jay. I mean, not turn over the ball. Just 2 picks that came in that Maryland game that really, like you mentioned, Maryland let them kind of get away with that one. Northwestern held it tight, but just didn't make enough plays down the stretch, and that score maybe wasn't so indicative of how that game actually went. I want to get more thoughts on Nebraska's defense from the former linebacker himself. But first, League One Volleyball is coming to Omaha this January. It's featuring gold medalists, NCAA champions, and international superstars. The season starts January 24th, and lovb.com is your place to go for more information and to purchase your tickets for the upcoming inaugural season in Omaha. Volleyball is the next major league. Make sure you tune in and check out League One Volleyball. Once again, lovb.com for more information. Okay, so we saw, Jay, that obviously Nebraska's been without Tommi Hill. He's still trying to get back from from his injury that he sustained a few weeks ago, rather. Ceyair Wright's stepped in smooth. And Matt Rhule said actually earlier today, Tommi Hill's questionable for Saturday's matchup against the Hoosiers. How much does Nebraska's defense change, if at all, if one of those guys like Tommi Hill's in there? What does he do maybe a little bit better than Ceyair Wright? Maybe what does Ceyair Wright do better than Tommi Hill? Kind of from your perspective, how does Nebraska's defense change or shift in any way, even if it's a little point, with those two guys in there?
Well, I mean, if you get Tommi Hill back, I mean, you get a well-established player, a guy that's been emerging ever since the Colorado game of last year, really, and is, obviously been in some high draft talks. Tommi Hill gives you some size. Obviously, he's a big corner, can run. He got really good ball skills because obviously he was good enough, but had ball skills to be able to play receiver at times as well, and with different regimes and different times in his career. But I think the emergence of Ceyair Wright has allowed Nebraska the flexibility to match up better with Indiana. So let's just say if Tommi Hill's playing or healthy enough to play, you got Ceyair Wright, you got Buford, Hartzog, and then obviously you got Singleton and then Gifford. That gives you flexibility in different body types to match up with everybody that they could bring out there. 4 or 5 or 4 wide receiver sets, 11 personnel with their pass catching tight end. It helps with the emergence. Also, let's not forget Javen Wright coming back, so he helps in the short area and in immediate passing game, and helps with the ability to really track down or work. So I think as Nebraska's getting healthier with the addition of Tommi Hill, hopefully coming back, but then the emergence of Ceyair Wright, that's what you want. You got to think he was a late addition in the transfer portal, right? Obviously, remember Bly Hill got hurt, and then picked him up, and then everybody, he was in a couple movies and all that stuff, and then he came in and he's really focused. And Tony White said he just had to get used to playing the way Nebraska wanted to play. Look, one thing I will say this: when I watch this tape, he can play man to man. And the one thing also he's done is he's competed. I like his energy. I like what he brings. I mean, he brings a kind of a real, authentic dog mentality that he's going to try to compete. And I think that's really helped Nebraska. And it's also, I think, allowed Tommi Hill to come back and be more healthy, and you know what I'm saying? Because it's kind of, I think Matt Rhule said, I don't want to speak for Matt Rhule, but I think he could have played last week. He's been warming up, so they kind of are been ramping him up, and then you get a bye week, and then hopefully he's able to go out there this week. But I think they feel very comfortable with Ceyair Wright is done, and then I think Buford as well, and then obviously Hartzog. So I think it's a good thing, and it gives you flexibility, and you need to be flexible against a kind of I'll say a quasi-tempo offense in Indiana that they like to go at a certain pace and hit you. But when you have guys that can cover and adjust and know the defense and have experience, I think it works out well.
Heartland and Nebraska Windows, your go-to full-service window company, family-owned and operated for over 30 years. Heartland of Nebraska Windows offers free estimates, full window replacements, and has a team of installers, so there's no subcontracting throughout the entire process. Give Heartland of Nebraska Windows a call today at 402-200-3836, or visit them online at heartlandofnebraskawindows.com. All right, a couple more, Jay, before we close it out. Once again, just kind of an overall preview conversation before we really dive deep into some of the keys to Saturday, tomorrow, and throughout the rest of the weekend. For the folks that don't know, Indiana's schedule: Florida International, Western Illinois, at UCLA, Charlotte, Maryland, and then at Northwestern before a bye week on the same weekend that Nebraska had a bye week last weekend on October 12th. After Nebraska, they will host Washington and Jed Fish next Saturday, but it is homecoming weekend. One thing I do want to stay on the defense with here is the applying pressure to the quarterback. In Nebraska's facing an offensive line here now, once again, that's only allowed 6 sacks all season long, which obviously break that down per game, and that's a sack per game. Yeah, sure, maybe the opponents do play a part in it, but once again, Jay, I mean, we say it every single weekend when we're on the pregame show. This feels like another day, another weekend where it could be Nebraska's front 4 or front 6, whatever it is, step up. That group of obviously Nash and Ty, but like a Principal Uman Mielen and John Bullock continuing to be strong. Javen Wright, like you talked about, kind of at that versatile position. And then how about Cameron Lenhart? Like there's a lot of guys that could still step up. Jamari Butler's getting healthier. Matt Rhule said it just feels like a big opportunity once again for Nebraska's front, 6-7.
Yeah, I think look, and let's not forget, man, big game James Williams, right? And
Yeah.
Kai Whalen, and then also let's Willis McGahee is showing the ability, and then Princewell. So the depth, again, the depth of Nebraska, the ability to play multiple guys throughout the early part of the season and perform well and be pretty consistent. I think in the three major categories, Nebraska is the only one that's in the top 12, and I think that improved last week after against Rutgers. So I think the ability to apply consistent pressure. I mentioned getting O'Rourke off his spot and taking away his first or second read. You can do that. That we got to cover down on the back end. You got to mix up your coverages, but then also the guys got to win one-on-one battles. I think the offensive line has a really good left tackle, and then they got two Wisconsin. They brought in the old Wisconsin previous staff's offensive line coach, and he brought two backup offensive linemen in with him. In Mike Katak and Carter Smith, and then obviously Drew Evans, right? And so those guys are veteran guys that have been pretty steady, and then obviously got pretty good, tackles and stuff like that. So I think Nebraska has some opportunities to win, right? And so when you get one-on-one, you got to win. And it's not just sacks, Nick. It's either, getting him off his spot, hits on the quarterback, getting in the pass lanes, and confusing him by, constantly being around him. And so the one thing I will say, the opponents obviously allowed him to be, very comfortable. The one thing that I think this offensive line has done is done a better job running the ball conventionally, even though O'Rourke with 1,700 yards and 14 touchdowns is getting, the receiver core is getting all the accolades. I think they've mixed in a good little bit of more physicality than people give them credit for. And so I think it's a big challenge, but I think Nebraska's defensive line depth gives them a distinct advantage. So now they just got to go out there and perform. And you're 100% right. It seems like every time you say it, the defensive line steps up and plays it excellent. So this is a great game on national TV and exposure, big noon kickoff and all that for Nash, Ty, Jamari, Cam Lenhart, because, Cam Lenhart and Jamari and James Williams are really interesting. And here's why. Along with, you just expect the same from Nash and Ty, but with those three, they are big enough, but then they give you a little bit more athletic ability to get out in space. You know what I'm saying? Say O'Rourke breaks the pocket. With Cam Lenhart being able to maybe chase him down a little bit, stopping him from getting the first down, get some hands on the ball. With Jamari Butler starting to get healthy, you saw him big time in the Purdue game, and obviously in the Rutgers really start getting busy in the backfield. James was closing. And then you saw Kai Whalen and the depth of those guys getting in. And also with Jackson, big number 55 has been in there and been pretty effective, along with Davis. We just named about 10, 11 guys that have made significant plays at times this year with the defensive line and the four-man front. So I think it sets up for Nebraska as well. I think both teams are pretty healthy, but I like our defensive line depth and our defense, how we match up. I've liked it even in the beginning of the season that Nebraska matches up with this, James Madison of the Midwest offense.
Sandhills Global is hiring. Join a dynamic team where your skills are valued and your career can soar. Sandhills Global is offering full-time positions in IT, marketing, sales, and finance. Apply today at sandhills.jobs. All right, last thing, just to kind of put a bow on Jay's comments there. Obviously Nebraska, like he said, 7th in the country right now in sacks. They have 20, which is about 3 per game, 3.33 sacks per game. It's not all about that sack number, like you said, Jay, but yeah, certainly it's a sexy number too. The leading running back for Indiana is somebody that we actually saw at Big Ten Media Days. They didn't take Curtis Rourke to Big Ten Media Days. They took Justice Ellison, their running back, to Big Ten Media Days, a senior from the state of Virginia, a little over 400 yards on the year, 6 touchdowns. This goes up against Nebraska's rushing defense, who, right, everybody gets caught up so much in the hasn't allowed a single rushing touchdown. But now that there's a good enough sample size, right, they face some really good running backs.
Yeah.
Obviously, the guy from Northern Iowa, then obviously Kyle Monangai and even Maccabee from Purdue. There's enough sample size here to kind of put, hang your hat on. Nebraska's rushing defense is pretty talented.
Yeah, I mean, look, they face different types of backs. I think Colorado has, they didn't run the ball obviously that much against Nebraska, but they had a pass catching running back. They had a boy of a bruiser, and I think his last name was Hayden. And then Northern Iowa had 2 running backs, 2 big backs, but they were plenty shifty. Then you had Illinois had a host of running backs. So I think Nebraska, they know this, man. And let's just be honest. And I know we came up here from Lincoln, but let's just be honest. If Nebraska handles their business, they'll be just fine. And they know that defensively, they match up well. They don't have no fear of Indiana, but a ton of respect. They know if Nebraska knows if they're not out there like losing leverage, missing checks, busting coverages. If they go out there and play steady, and you asked me, what does it take? I told you the three things I think, and we'll dive into it, multiple times. The next couple of days, I'm pretty excited to really dive into offensive special teams with you in different segments, providing the ultimate value to, the three main sponsors. But also one thing that kind of gets overlooked, Nick, or I call it glossed over, is just being steady. Being steady. You know what I mean? Line up, play, make them beat you. Then you make the plays you need and see how long they really want to play football.
It was interesting you mentioned, there's an opportunity ahead for Nebraska, and especially some of the older guys that are playing on the big stage, national TV this weekend. Like, this is what comes with it, right? Like, you guys know it, and maybe it wasn't such a big scale and there weren't so many channels when you guys were playing, but yet you guys were still publicized quite a bit, and because of your success. Like, this is what comes with it. So if Nebraska eventually wants to get to this point where they're fighting for playoff opportunities or fighting for the conference and for hardware at the end of the day, like, you got to show up. It's one thing to show up at a sleepy, 2:30 or 6 p.m. kickoff against an FCS opponent. But hey, when the lights are on, like, it's go time. We can't have, if you're Nebraska, any more of the 62-3 performances or the single game rushing record. Like, all of that's got to eventually be in the past. And that point that you said about being steady, like, that's part one, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think, I think there's a better feeling about this team. I think a lot of it has to do with the addition of Dylan Raiola and the guys on offense. I think the defense has a lot more confidence in it. And I think it's a full year of Matt Rhule and staff instilling some accountability, some confidence, and the confidence comes from actually true hard work, right, and being held accountable. And so they're seeing the fruits of their labor. So, I mean, of course, the eyesores of Nebraska over the last 20 some years, you don't want that thing to show up. But I think and again, I think this team is very confident as long as they get off that bus with their mind right and intent to play their best, and they go out there and play steady, and then make the plays they need to play. And it's matchup against matchup. Nebraska feels very, very confident in what they can do, and so do I. And so, really, you know what, Nick, I'll say this, man, before we jump off, is like the recipe is easy. It's just hard to cook, right? It's easy, right? In the sense of handle your business. Now, it's hard because Indiana's a pretty dang good team, right? But it's also harder that this is like a maturity game that you got to be mature enough to show up and handle the pressure that you put on yourself. But it's a good pressure because this is what you got to think for guys like Ty Robinson, Isaac Gifford, Nash, all the guys like Bryce Benhart and all those guys, Ben Scott, everybody that took the leap of faith to come back, right, and say, what, we want another shot to be the team that gets Nebraska, back to respectability, get back in the bowl hunt, so forth and so on. So it's one thing to say it. Now you got to go out there and do it. Now you got to go out there and lead by your actions and step up to the competition, and then obviously raise the level of guys around you. So it's a big game for some of the the well-known more thought of players and guys that have been getting a lot of media attention. But I think they'll handle themselves pretty well.
Yeah, so once again, Jay and myself will be out here from Indianapolis / Bloomington, if you will, through Saturday. Actually, obviously, be here for the game. Make sure you follow us on Twitter. They're on your screen there, Nick_Ceyair at Foreman 5644. I want to thank our sponsors once again: League One Volleyball of Omaha, Heartland of Nebraska Windows, and Sandhills Global. That's just a peek into kind of the content that you guys are going to get this weekend. We will be, like I said, broadcasting live from the Tap in Bloomington, just about less than 5 minutes away from Memorial Stadium in Bloomington, ahead of Nebraska and Indiana. We'll be doing that tomorrow night on Friday. So if you're making the trip out here to Indiana, first of all, safe travels, get here, and then make sure you come out and hang out with us at the Tap. And I'm sure hopefully there will be a lot of Husker fans making the trip. I told you the story, Jay, and I'll tell it on air here, is that I was talking to the owner of the Tap, and he asked me, he goes, Nick, listen, It's homecoming weekend. Indiana 6-0. Do Husker fans really travel that well? And I said, oh yeah, I think you're going to be surprised. So this is the first time since I believe 2016 Nebraska's been in Bloomington. They were 10th in the country last time, obviously, under Mike Riley. That was when they started 6-0. Last time that they ever got to a bowl game, rather, was with a win in Bloomington back in the late 2010s. Now we'll see what happens on Saturday. So we'll broadcast live from the Tap tomorrow night, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern time, 6 to 8 p.m. Central time. That'll be live on all of our streams, all of our platforms, and on the FM dial. Jay, any final words before we sign off?
No, man, I'm excited for it. It's a big weekend for Indianapolis and Bloomington, and I'm glad Big Reg's going to come in and represent. But I'm really excited to see Huskers go play and see a good game on national TV.
Once again, thanks to our sponsors, League One Volleyball, Omaha, Heartland of Nebraska Windows, Sandhills Global for their support. You'll hear a lot more from Jay and myself throughout the next couple of days. Until then, we'll talk to you tomorrow from Indianapolis.